Meanwhile, Donald Trump is now ramping up his rhetoric in the wake of the terror attack in Istanbul. The presumptive GOP nominee is again calling for torture tactics to be used against ISIS fighters. He also insisted that his Democratic opponent, Hillary Clinton, will, and I quote, never get tougher, end quote, on terror. Here's Major Garrett with more.
ISIS was created during the Hillary Clinton regime.
Donald Trump blamed rival Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration for misreading the ISIS threat. Trump called that key evidence to gauge Clinton's future effectiveness if she were president.
And if she gets in, it'll be massive, and we won't even have a country anymore. We're going to be afraid to walk outside.
Trump's insistence that ISIS could whip the world's leading military power irks fellow Republicans. So do his calls for using interrogation tactics as a response to the group's barbarity.
So we can't do waterboarding, but they can do chopping off heads, drowning people in steel cages. They can do whatever they want to do.
2008 Republican nominee and Vietnam prisoner of war John McCain, himself a victim of torture, said waterboarding wastes time and jeopardizes American troops.
If you inflict enough pain on someone, that person will tell you whatever they think that you want to hear in order to make the pain stop. If we torture people, then what would we expect that our enemy would do to Americans that were captured?
Well, I simply can't vote for him.
And 2012 GOP nominee Mitt Romney told CBS's John Dickerson that Trump's approach is unwise and damaging.
I think it's taken us in a direction which will be very unfortunate long term.
And just when he thought he was out, we pulled him back in. Major Garrett, in-house.
I love Godfather 3 references.
It was one of them. It was one of the trilogy. I want to get to your piece in just a second, Major, but want to ask you about this meeting now between former President Bill Clinton and the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, in Phoenix a couple of days ago. We learned of it. Both are now saying there was no impropriety. Nothing was discussed with regard to the investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server, etc. But for a couple for whom optics have been a problem, this certainly seems to be yet another one.
So let's assume, just for the moment, it is legally innocent. It is not optically innocent by any stretch of the imagination. And let me just suggest that viewers curious about this story think about it if the parties were in a different party. Mm-hmm. Let us say it was the spouse of Scooter Libby. In the middle of his investigation as to whether or not he leaked the name of a CIA operative to freeze out that person or somehow prevail in the ongoing debate over the Iraq weapons of mass destruction intelligence. And that spouse met with the Attorney General considering what to do about Scooter Libby's legal fate. What would any reasonable Democrat say about that? Understanding, of course, that Scooter Libby's spouse in this fictional representation I've just made isn't a former president who is running a foundation, charitable foundation, that nevertheless collects a great deal of money from corporations and foreign entities to do what it says are charitable works around the world, but is nevertheless part of this ongoing investigation. Bill Clinton is not just a former president, he's a potential witness. Now, I'm not saying he's a potential explosive witness, but he could be involved in this. Not only could he be involved in it, his wife currently is. And the only reason I think this is really important in the context of the campaign that I cover, which is the Donald Trump campaign, is Donald Trump has made it very clear. Conspiracy theories and him kind of have a thing. They kind of dig one another. They kind of dig one another. But this, ladies and gentlemen, not a conspiracy theory. You can theorize things about this that are negative because the two principles involved say, well, nothing bad happened. Well, what else are they going to say?
This is a this actually happened theory.
This actually happened.
Yeah.
And why did it happen? And is it a good idea? Is it helpful to believing whatever the outcome of this investigation happens to be? Now, if the FBI and the Justice Department come down like a ton of bricks on Hillary Clinton, and people say, well, it didn't make any difference, fine. But if it doesn't, does this add an air of uncertainty or at least skepticism? I think it does. And if you're someone involved in the public presentation of not just politics, but its intersection with the law, ought you not to be doubly or trebly careful?
Yes, the door is ajar. Meanwhile, to your piece,
yes,
with regard to Donald Trump, using rhetoric about waterboarding and worse. He's done this before, and again, here we're seeing Republican establishment figures push back. where does this sit?
And it's not just Republican establishment figures on this. The question of waterboarding or worse, surveilling mosques under certain circumstances in this country, a temporary blanket ban on Muslim immigration. People who have been involved in the war on terrorism and its ups and downs and the anxiety it has justifiably created don't believe these ideas work. They've been in the trenches. They've tried these things. The Bush administration tried waterboarding. It had some value, but in its overall application was more harm than good. And that's from the people who applied it and who believed it would be helpful. So this isn't necessarily a political argument. It's an experiential argument for people who've tried to win this war on our terms and consistent with American values. And when Trump says, well, our enemies have no values, John McCain, who was a victim of torture in Vietnam, says, but our values do matter. Over the long term, they really do matter. And that's an essential argument to have in this campaign and any campaign. And as long as the war on terrorism, however it is defined or interpreted, goes on, we're going to continue to have this debate. Trump has come down on a side of it that Republicans thought was largely settled. He's reintroducing it. He's reanimating it. But I don't think it is working to his political benefit, and it does give Hillary Clinton an opportunity to align herself, not just with Democrats, but with Republicans who have been at this task and now have come to the conclusion that she has as well.
And it certainly lends itself to this developing idea of Donald Trump as running against his party as much as he's running against Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. We're also seeing that with regard to trade, a speech set to be given in New Hampshire later today. If it echoes what we've heard from him in these last few speeches in the last week or so, again, feuding with safe havens like the Chamber of Commerce, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, even as he courts Bernie Sanders supporters, perhaps looks to go to the left of the presumptive Democratic nominee with regard to trade. What to make of this multi-front fight now that Donald Trump seems to want to fight?
So on trade, it really is worth noting. Donald Trump is against regulations, typical Republican line. Wants to cut taxes across the board, typical Republican line for individuals and businesses. Wants a stronger military, use it maybe a little bit more cautiously than George W. Bush, but all that's essentially no insult intended, garden variety Republican ideology. It's what the party believes. But on trade, he has taken this completely different point of view, and he's making an intellectual argument that free trade has done more harm than good. There are lots of statistics, economists, certainly the Wall Street Journal editorial page, the Chamber of Commerce Business Roundtable, big corporations say, no, we've got all the data. Yes, there have been some job losses, but in a globalized economy, there have been benefits for consumers for lower priced goods, and more people have made jobs exporting to Canada and Mexico, as an example, than they've lost by taking imports from those two countries. Trump ignores and rejects all of that, and it is consistent with something that Ross Perot said when he ran as an independent against Republicans and against a Republican president in 1992, and it encapsulates this one aspect of republicanism that is kind of ancient. It's almost 150 years old. The tariff party, the party of national trade and national protection in a globalized economy. It is an argument Republicans used to make. I mean, when Donald Trump quotes Alexander Hamilton, you know he's really going back into the founding fathers and the definition of a national economy on a global stage. But that was back when tariffs were the only means of collecting revenue in this country. We didn't have an income tax. The only way you could collect revenue was to have tariffs. Well, now in a globalized economy, you have many different ways to collect revenue. But Trump has taken this argument and is not just doubling down on it, to use that grotesquely overused cliche, but he is making it a central theme in places where he believes he can be competitive. Pennsylvania, Ohio, the industrial Midwest. But that is not an argument that's going to resonate on the coasts at all, or in the Mountain West, for example, which is politically and technologically, even among Republicans, oriented toward a much more globalist and expansive, export-driven approach to economics. So we'll see how it plays. It is very definitely a new argument. There is an intellectual heft behind it in some ways that is different for Trump. He's actually thought through some of this and got some policy people to put some meat on these bones. But it is a brand new argument for Republicans. And if you are asking yourself the question, are there moments when Donald Trump genuinely believes to be attempting to remake the Republican Party? In this case, you could say absolutely yes.
we should also expect perhaps he will make the exact counter argument tomorrow, because it would be.
Although on this one, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
it
I
would
think
be a
there is
better
a
day.
consistency historically. Of course, one other quick note, it doesn't comport at all with his actual business practices. He has rhetorically been against trade for a long time, better part of 20 to 25 years, but as a businessman, he's used all the tools of globalization. Cheap labor, outsourced, all those sorts of things, importing labor to build some of his properties. So when he looks at this at a bottom line perspective, he makes exactly the same determinations. The Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable, and the fine ladies and gentlemen at the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal with me.
Major Garrett, on his way to somewhere. Thanks, pal.
See ya.